My Mill kept inviting my husband's ex to dinner, then asked me to be understanding. She thought I'd keep smiling through the humiliation until one decision changed every family dinner forever. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. I should have known something was wrong the first time my mother-in-law invited my husband's ex-girlfriend to our engagement party. Not as a guest, mind you, but as a co-host. At the time, I thought maybe she was just one of those overly inclusive people who couldn't bear to hurt anyone's feelings. You know the type, the ones who invite their dentist to family gatherings and insist the mailman stay for dinner. My husband assured me it was nothing, that his mother just had trouble letting people go. He said it with such conviction that I believed him. I wanted to believe him. We'd been dating for 2 years and I loved him. So I convinced myself this was just a quirky family thing. Some families are loud, some are quiet, and apparently his family kept ex-girlfriends around like houseplants. I married him anyway, despite that glaring red flag waving directly in my face, practically slapping me with its bright red fabric. The engagement party itself should have been my wake-up call. The ex stood at the entrance greeting guests alongside my mother-in-law like they were hosting a charity gala together. She wore a dress remarkably similar to mine. Same shade of blue, same style, which my mother-in-law later claimed was just a funny coincidence. The ex knew details about the party that I hadn't even known, like what orvas were being served and what time the photographer would arrive. When I asked my husband about it, he shrugged and said his mother probably just needed help with planning. Help from his ex-girlfriend for our engagement party. The logic was so backwards it gave me whiplash. The ex's name kept coming up in conversation at family dinners. Casual mentions at first. Oh, she used to make this dish for us. Or she always knew how to arrange flowers so beautifully. Innocent enough, right, wrong. So very wrong. Within the first 6 months of our marriage, I realized my mother-in-law had never actually moved on from her son's previous relationship. She spoke about the ex like she was a daughter who had tragically died in some beautiful, poetic way, not a girlfriend who had broken up with her son over 5 years ago, because from what I'd gathered, they simply weren't compatible long-term. I tried talking to my husband about it during those early months, but he'd look at me with confused eyes and say he hadn't noticed. His mother mentioned his ex constantly, and he genuinely didn't see it as a problem. I started to realize this had been normalized for him his entire life. The dinner invitations started around month 7 of our marriage. Surprise dinners where the ex just happened to be there too. My mother-in-law would act shocked, claiming she'd completely forgotten she'd invited both of us. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry I completely spaced, but you're both here now, so let's just make the best of it. My husband would squeeze my hand under the table, but never actually confronted his mother about the pattern. The comparisons began subtly. She used to fold the napkins this way. She knew exactly how I liked my tea. Then they became less subtle. She was always so good with children. Do you like children, Bryn? This was asked at a family barbecue in front of about 20 relatives. She could cook a roast that would make you cry. Can you cook a roast, Bryn? I could, actually. But after that comment, I never cooked one for my mother-in-law. I started keeping a mental tally. And by the end of the first year, I'd been compared to this woman constantly. I mentioned this to my best friend during a wine night, and she asked me why I was still going to family dinners. Good question. My husband kept insisting his mother would come around. He kept saying she just needed time to adjust. Time to adjust to what exactly? Her son being happy, her son being married to someone who wasn't her chosen candidate. I started to realize that my husband's passivity wasn't kindness or patience. It was cowardice. Plain and simple cowardice. He was terrified of confronting his mother, terrified of setting boundaries, terrified of choosing me over her feelings. Every time I brought it up, he'd say things like, she's just set in her ways, or that's just how she is, or my personal favorite, she means well. She did not mean well. Nobody who means well invites their son's ex-girlfriend to family events specifically to make the current wife uncomfortable. Nobody who means well spends an entire dinner listing all the ways the ex was superior. Nobody who means well does any of this. But my husband had been trained since childhood to accept his mother's behavior, to excuse it, to enable it. He'd spent his entire life walking on eggshells around her moods, and he'd gotten so good at it that he didn't even realize he was doing it anymore. The situation with the wedding seating arrangement should have been my breaking point. It really should have been. We'd carefully planned the family table, immediate family only. My parents, his parents, my maid of honor, who was my sister, and his best man, who was his brother. 6 people, perfect number for a round table, elegant and intimate. The morning of the wedding, I found the ex sitting at our family table during the rehearsal, chatting with my mother-in-law like they were old friends catching up over brunch. She was laughing at something my mother-in-law said, touching her arm affectionately, looking completely at home at my wedding rehearsal. When I questioned it, trying to keep my voice calm and level because I was already stressed about 17 other wedding details, my mother-in-law looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, didn't I tell you I invited her because she's practically family? She's been part of our lives for so long, it would feel wrong not to include her in this special day." Special day. My special day. My wedding. And she'd invited my husband's ex-girlfriend to sit at the family table like she was the bride's long-lost sister or something. I had to physically remove a name card. At my own wedding, my hands were shaking with anger and frustration and disbelief. My maid of honor, my sister, who has never minced words in her entire life, took one look at my face and marched over to my mother-in-law. "She's not sitting here. She's not sitting anywhere near the family tables. Actually, why is she even here? This is bizarre." My mother-in-law clutched her pearls, literally clutched them, and said she was just trying to be inclusive. My sister told her there's a difference between being inclusive and being inappropriate, and this was firmly in the inappropriate category. My husband apologized profusely, but did absolutely nothing to prevent it from happening in the first place. He didn't call his mother beforehand to confirm the guest list. He didn't question why an ex-girlfriend would be at the family table. He didn't stand up to his mother or tell her this was crossing a line. He just apologized to me after the fact and expected that to be enough. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But I was getting married in 6 hours. And I didn't have time to process the full scope of how dysfunctional this family dynamic actually was. Year 2 of marriage brought more of the same, only amplified. The ex showed up at my baby shower for my cousin carrying a gift that was somehow more expensive and more thoughtful than mine. She appeared at my husband's birthday party with a cake she'd baked herself, complete with intricate frosting decorations that spelled out inside jokes I didn't understand. She was there at Christmas, sitting by the fireplace like she belonged there, opening presents my mother-in-law had bought specifically for her. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, gift cards to places I knew for a fact my mother-in-law had never bought me anything from. My sister-in-law pulled me aside at that Christmas gathering and told me she thought the whole situation was absolutely insane, that she'd never seen her mother act this way about anyone else, not even her own ex-boyfriends. She said when she'd broken up with her high school boyfriend, her mother had immediately removed all photos and stopped mentioning him. But with her brother's ex, it was like the woman had earned lifetime membership status in the family, complete with benefits and a permanent seat at every gathering. That conversation was the only thing that kept me sane for months, knowing I wasn't imagining the absolute bizarreness of this dynamic. My sister-in-law admitted she'd tried talking to her mother about it once, suggesting maybe it was time to move on. And her mother had cried for 2 hours about how nobody understood her heart, how she'd loved the ex like a daughter, how she couldn't just turn off those feelings. My sister-in-law told her that, yes, actually you can turn off those feelings when your son marries someone else. Apparently that conversation hadn't gone well. I started documenting things, every comment, every comparison, every surprise appearance. I kept a journal, which sounds paranoid, but I needed proof that this was actually happening, that I wasn't losing my mind or being overly sensitive like my husband sometimes suggested. The journal entries were damning. March 12th, 10, ML mentioned X 7 times during 2-hour dinner. Compared my pot roast to X's pot roast unfavorably, said X always knew to add more salt. April 3rd, X. At Easter dinner, wore pastel dress same color as mine. Mel commented that X wore it better. The Thanksgiving incident was what finally broke me. I'd spent 3 days preparing dishes for the family dinner. 3 entire days. I took time off work, I researched recipes, I made everything from scratch because I wanted to prove something, though in retrospect I'm not sure what I was trying to prove. That I could cook, that I was worthy, that I deserved to be part of this family. I made my grandmother's famous sweet potato casserole, a recipe that had been passed down for 4 generations in my family. It was the dish everyone requested at every holiday, the dish that made my grandmother legendary in our family circles. The recipe was sacred to me, sweet potatoes mashed with butter and brown sugar, topped with a pecan streusel that crisped perfectly in the oven with just a hint of cinnamon and nutmeg that made the whole kitchen smell like autumn. My grandmother had taught me how to make it when I was 12 years old, had written down the recipe in her shaky handwriting, had told me this was our family's legacy. I'd made it every Thanksgiving since she'd passed away, and people always said it tasted exactly like hers. It was the one dish I knew I could nail, the one thing I knew would be perfect. I arrived at my mother-in-law's house early to help set up carrying my grandmother's casserole dish wrapped in towels to keep it warm. The house smelled amazing like turkey and stuffing and all the traditional Thanksgiving foods. And then I walked into the kitchen and saw it. Another sweet potato casserole. Same dish, same pecan topping sitting on the counter, like it had every right to be there. The ex was standing next to it, smiling at my mother-in-law, accepting compliments on how beautiful it looked. I stood there in the doorway holding my casserole, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My mother-in-law turned and saw me, and her face did this thing. This little flash of satisfaction before she arranged her features into false surprise. "Oh, Bryn, you brought sweet potato casserole too. What a funny coincidence." Well, I guess we'll have two to choose from. It wasn't a coincidence. She'd asked the ex to bring that specific dish. She'd given her my family recipe, the one my husband had seen me make dozens of times, the one he'd raved about to his family. When it came time to serve dinner, my mother-in-law made a big show of tasting both casseroles. She took a forkful of mine, chewing slowly, her face neutral. Then she took a forkful of the ex's, and her whole face lit up like she just tasted heaven. "Oh my goodness, this is incredible. Everyone has to try this one." She held up the ex's casserole dish. "I think hers is better. Don't you all agree?" She asked this to the entire table. 23 people all watching this humiliation unfold in real time. Some people looked uncomfortable and stayed silent. Others, the ones who'd always taken my mother-in-law's side in everything, nodded enthusiastically and agreed that yes, the ex's version was superior, fluffier, better spice, balance, perfect sweetness. My mother-in-law served the ex's casserole to everyone at the table, dolloping generous portions onto plates, raving about every bite. My casserole sat on the side table, untouched, a monument to my inadequacy. I watched 23 people eat that woman's version of my grandmother's recipe, while mine sat there getting cold and congealed like a rejected science project at a school fair. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried for 15 minutes. Ugly crying. The kind where your mascara runs and your nose gets all red and you make those gasping sounds that you hope nobody can hear through the door. When I came back, my husband was still sitting there eating the ex's casserole, completely oblivious to the fact that his mother had just publicly humiliated his wife. He was laughing at something his uncle said, had a napkin tucked into his collar, looked perfectly content with the world. That image is burned into my brain forever. Him eating that casserole, smiling while I stood in the doorway with swollen eyes and a shattered heart. That was the moment I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. I couldn't keep being the understanding wife who smiled through the disrespect. I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep his family warm. Something had to change, or I had to leave. There was no middle ground left, no compromise that would make this situation tolerable. Either he stood up for me or I walked, simple as that. 3 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. 12 weeks along, actually, which meant I'd been pregnant during the Thanksgiving disaster and hadn't even known. I'd been so stressed about the family situation that I'd barely noticed I'd missed 2 periods. I chalked it up to stress because stress does weird things to your body, and I'd been chronically stressed for approximately 3 years straight. But when I started feeling nauseous in the mornings and couldn't stomach coffee anymore, which for me is basically a sign of the apocalypse, I took a test. Actually, I took 4 tests, all positive. 4 little windows with 2 lines, 4 pieces of plastic telling me I was growing a human. The doctor confirmed it with an ultrasound. I sat in that examination room staring at the tiny blob on the screen, listening to the rapid whoosh-hoo-hoo of the heartbeat, thinking about what kind of grandmother my mother-in-law would be. Would she compare my parenting to the ex's hypothetical parenting? Would she invite the ex to my baby's birthday parties? Would she show up at the hospital when I gave birth and ask if the ex could be in the delivery room too? The thought made me physically ill, more ill than the morning sickness already making me feel. The technician printed out ultrasound photos for me. These grainy black and white images where you could barely make out what was supposedly a baby. She smiled and said, "Congratulations," told me everything looked healthy and normal, gave me pamphlets about prenatal vitamins and what to expect in the coming months. I thanked her and left the office, sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes just staring at those ultrasound photos, trying to feel happy, trying to feel anything other than dread. I didn't tell my husband right away. I needed time to think, time to figure out what I was going to do. Could I bring a child into this family dynamic? Could I subject my kid to growing up with a grandmother who valued an ex-girlfriend more than her own grandchild? Could I trust my husband to protect our child when he'd failed to protect me for 3 solid years? These weren't rhetorical questions. These were real concerns that kept me up at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling this tiny person growing inside me and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. But fate, Or maybe just terrible timing forced my hand. My mother-in-law called 2 days after I found out about the pregnancy using that fake sweet voice she always used when she was about to do something awful. Hi, sweetheart. I'm planning a little family dinner for this weekend. Nothing fancy, just close family. I'd love for you and my son to come. I could hear it in her voice before she even said it. That little note of guilty anticipation. And then she said it. Oh, and I invited a few friends too, including, well, you know who, I hope that's okay. She's been going through a hard time lately, and I thought it would be nice to include her. Something inside me snapped. I told my husband about the pregnancy right there in our kitchen. Just blurted it out without any of the cute announcement I'd been planning. I'm pregnant, 12 weeks, and I'm done. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You're what? You're pregnant. That's amazing. That's incredible. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He moved to hug me, but I stepped back, but his smile faltered. What do you mean you're done? I told him his mother had exactly one choice to make. She could have a relationship with her future grandchild, or she could continue her bizarre obsession with his ex-girlfriend, but she couldn't have both. I was drawing a line. And if she crossed it, she would never meet this baby. Never. Not at the hospital, not at birthdays, not at holidays. If she wanted to keep playing house with his ex, she could do it without us and without her grandchild. My husband started to say something about his mother, meaning well about her just being attached to the past, but I cut him off. My voice was shaking, and I could feel tears starting, but I kept talking. She humiliated me at Thanksgiving. She invited your ex to be a co-host at our engagement party. She tried to seat her at our wedding table. She compares me to her constantly, and you just sit there and let it happen. I have spent 3 years of my life being told, I'm not good enough and I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not raising a child in this environment. I told him if he didn't support me on this, if he didn't stand up to his mother right now, immediately I would leave. I would pack my bags, take our unborn child, and leave. And he could explain to everyone why his marriage fell apart. Maybe he could invite his ex to his divorce party. She could help pick out the decorations. I was serious, dead serious. He could see it in my face, hear it in my voice. This wasn't a bluff or an ultimatum I'd back down from. This was happening one way or another that seemed to wake him up. Something clicked in his brain, some survival instinct that finally overrode years of conditioning. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I think for the first time in our marriage, he understood how close he was to losing everything. How close I was to walking out that door and never coming back. How serious I was about every word I just said. He picked up his phone right there, right in front of me, and opened his contacts. Found the ex's number and blocked it. Just blocked it. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Then he called his mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheery. Hi, honey. Have you talked to Bryn about dinner? I'm making that roast you love so much. He cut her off. Mom, we need to talk. Bryn is pregnant and you need to make a choice right now. Either you stop inviting my ex to family events and stop comparing Bryn to her, or you don't get to be part of this baby's life at all. No hospital visits, no birthdays, nothing. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice change through the phone, going from cheerful to shocked to defensive in about 3 seconds. What? What are you talking about? I'm just trying to keep everyone included. I don't understand why you're being so unreasonable. She's like family to me. My husband's jaw tightened. She's not family, Mom. She's my ex-girlfriend from over 5 years ago. Bryn is your daughter-in-law. Bryn is carrying your grandchild. And if you can't prioritize them over someone I used to date, then you've made your choice. My mother-in-law started crying. I could hear it through the phone. Those dramatic sobs that she'd always used to manipulate situations in her favor. How can you do this to me? How can you make me choose I love you? I love you so much. I just want everyone to be happy to be. Why are you punishing me for caring too much? My husband actually rolled his eyes, which I'd never seen him do when talking to his mother. I'm not punishing you. I'm setting a boundary. You have until the end of the week to decide. He hung up. Just hung up on his crying mother. Something I'd never witnessed in 3 years of marriage. We sat in silence for a long time. I wanted to feel relieved, but instead I just felt exhausted. 3 years of this nonsense, and it took me threatening to leave and announcing a pregnancy for him to finally do something about it. Better late than never, I suppose, but the resentment was already there, sitting between us like a third person at the table. I appreciated what he'd just done, but I also couldn't forget the 3 years of inaction that preceded it. The week passed with excruciating slowness. My mother-in-law didn't call, didn't text, nothing. Radio silence. I wasn't sure if she was punishing us with the silent treatment or actually taking time to think about her choice. My husband checked his phone obsessively, waiting for a message that never came. He tried to call her twice, but she didn't answer. He left voicemails that went unreturned. I could see the worry and hurt on his face. Could see him grappling with the reality that his mother might actually choose his ex over him. When the deadline arrived, my father-in-law called instead. His voice was shaking when he told us that his wife had made her choice. I put the phone on speaker so I could hear. She chose her. My father-in-law said, his voice breaking. I tried to talk to her, tried to make her see reason, but she said she couldn't abandon someone who needed her. Said the ex has been through so much and depends on her support. She said you two would be fine without her, but the ex wouldn't be. My husband asked his father to repeat it like he couldn't possibly have heard correctly. Are you saying mom chose my ex-girlfriend over her own grandchild? His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was in shock. That's what I'm saying. My father-in-law confirmed. I'm so sorry, son. I tried. I really tried. I don't understand her reasoning. I don't understand any of this. But yes, she chose to maintain her relationship with your ex rather than be part of your child's life. My husband went pale. All the color drained from his face in an instant. He hung up the phone and just sat there on the couch staring at nothing, his hands shaking slightly. I didn't know what to say. What do you say when someone's mother picks their ex over them, when she chooses a woman who hasn't been in her son's life romantically for over 5 years over her own flesh and blood? I sat next to him and held his hand, and we stayed like that for hours. He kept saying he couldn't believe it, couldn't understand how she could do this. I could believe it. I'd seen this coming from a mile away, had watched this train wreck build up speed for 3 years. But hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the gut, like confirmation that yes, it really was that bad. Yes, she really did value the ex more than her own son and future grandchild. Yes, we really had been fighting a losing battle this entire time. The insanity of it was almost impressive in its scope. We thought that was the end of it. We thought we could move forward, build our little family of 3, leave the dysfunction behind us. We were wrong. So incredibly wrong. 2 weeks later, my father-in-law called again. This time his voice wasn't just shaking. It was panicked. He was breathing hard like he'd been running or was having an anxiety attack. You need to sit down for this, he said. Both of you need to sit down right now. He told us the ex was pregnant and she was claiming the baby was my husband's. The words hung in the air like a grenade that had just had its pin pulled. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my hands go numb. My husband grabbed the phone and started shouting, his voice cracking with emotion. What the hell are you talking about? I haven't seen or spoken to her in over 5 years. I've barely looked at her during those forced family dinners. My father-in-law said the ex had called his wife crying hysterically, saying she'd been seeing my husband in secret for months, and now she was pregnant and didn't know what to do. Said they'd been having an affair, sneaking around, meeting up when I wasn't around. My mother-in-law had apparently believed her immediately without question, without asking for any proof or timeline. And now she was demanding that my husband do the right thing and take responsibility for this supposed baby. Demanding that he leave me, move in with the ex, be a father to the ex's child. I started laughing not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming or breaking things or completely falling apart. My husband hadn't touched that woman in over 5 years. He'd barely looked at her during the forced family dinners. During those horrible Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings, he'd actively avoided her. Sat as far away as possible, kept conversations brief and superficial. The idea that they'd been having some secret affair was so ridiculous. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so devastating, if it wasn't threatening to destroy everything. When I managed to ask, my voice shaky, when does she claim this happened? My father-in-law said the ex was being vague about details, just saying it had been going on for months, that they'd been meeting up whenever they could find time. My husband was pacing now, running his hands through his hair, his face red with anger and panic. That's impossible. That's completely impossible. I'm never alone. I'm either at work or with Bryn or with friends. When exactly was I supposed to be having this affair? We spent the next 2 days building our case. Not 2 hours. 2 full days of gathering every piece of evidence we could find. My husband took time off work. I called in sick. We treated it like the investigation it was, because our entire marriage was on trial based on a lie. Day 1, we focused on digital evidence. Every calendar entry for the past year cross-referenced with his work schedule, his Google Maps timeline showing every place his phone had been, text messages, emails, anything that showed where he was and who he was with. We found his gym membership records showing badge swipes every Monday and Thursday morning at 6. His office building security logs going back 90 days showing exactly when he entered and left each day. Day 2, we tackled finances and witnesses. Credit card statements going back 18 months printed out and highlighted. Every charge accounted for, from our regular grocery store to the gas station near our house to restaurants we'd gone to together. We called friends, coworkers, his gym trainer, anyone who could verify his whereabouts and routine. His best friend confirmed their Wednesday evening basketball games. His coworker confirmed their Friday lunches. Every piece fit together perfectly. No gaps, no mysteries, no unexplained absences. My sister came over on day 2 with her professional camera. She spent hours photographing every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. She interviewed my husband like a lawyer deposing a witness, asking detailed questions about his schedule, his habits, his interactions with the ex at family events. She created a digital folder, backed everything up in 3 places, organized it all by date and category. By the time she was done, we had a case file that would make a prosecutor jealous. I called the ex's number, which my husband had unblocked for this specific purpose. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice soft and hesitant. Hello. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. This is Bryn. You have 24 hours to provide a dated ultrasound and agree to a paternity test done at a facility of our choosing, or we will take legal action for defamation, slander, and emotional distress. Do you understand? There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then she hung up. Just hung up without saying a word. My mother-in-law called immediately after, within literally 30 seconds, which told me the ex had her on speed dial. She was screaming, actually screaming so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. How dare you harass a pregnant woman? How dare you threaten her? She's vulnerable and scared, and you're being cruel and heartless. What kind of person are you? I told her the only heartless person in this situation was her, and if she wanted proof, she could look in the mirror. That maybe she should ask herself why she was so quick to believe a woman she barely knew over her own son. Why she was willing to destroy her relationship with her son based on absolutely zero evidence. What kind of mother does that? My husband took the phone from me before I could say something I'd really regret. He told his mother that unless she could provide concrete evidence of this supposed affair, actual proof beyond the word of a woman who had every reason to lie, she needed to stop calling us, stop harassing us, stop believing every dramatic claim without bothering to verify it. She started crying. Those same manipulative sobs she always used. My son has changed. You've poisoned him against his own family. He never used to talk to me like this. What have you done to him? He told her that she had destroyed their relationship all on her own, that if there was any poison involved, she was the one who'd been spreading it for 3 years. 3 years of comparisons, 3 years of disrespect, 3 years of prioritizing his ex over his wife. This wasn't sudden. This had been building for a long time. And she'd ignored every warning sign, every boundary attempt, every hint that her behavior was unacceptable. Then he hung up. Actually hung up on his crying mother for the 2nd time in 2 weeks. The next day, my mother-in-law started posting on social media. Vague posts about betrayal and disappointment, about how children grow up and forget their parents, about how some people show their true colors when things get difficult, about how grandmother's rights matter too, about how she was being punished for loving too much. The posts were carefully crafted to make her look like a victim without providing any actual context. Her friends commented with supportive messages, dozens of them. I'm so sorry you're going through this. You deserve better. Families should stick together. I can't believe they're treating you this way. Praying for you. None of them knew the full story, of course. They just knew her version, which painted her as the doting mother being cruelly cut off by her ungrateful son and evil daughter-in-law. She was spinning a narrative, building a support system, preparing for war. My husband's extended family started taking sides based on those posts. His aunt called to tell him he should be ashamed of himself, that his mother had always been nothing but loving and supportive, that we were breaking her heart. His uncle sent a long text message about family loyalty and responsibility, about how you don't abandon your mother over minor disagreements. His cousins unfriended me on social media, blocked me, started liking and sharing my mother-in-law's posts with comments about how sad it is when families fall apart. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, seeing the family fracture and divide based on my mother-in-law's carefully crafted narrative. She was good at this, had probably been doing this kind of manipulation for decades. Only a handful of relatives reached out to ask our side of the story. My husband's uncle on the other side of the family called and said something didn't add up, that he'd noticed the strange dynamic with the ex at family gatherings and had always thought it was weird. My husband's cousin, who was more like a sister to him, called crying and saying she believed us, that she'd seen firsthand how their mother treated me. But the rest, they just assumed we were the problem, assumed we were cruel for cutting off this poor loving mother who just wanted to be part of her grandchild's life. They didn't know about the 3 years of comparisons, didn't know about the Thanksgiving humiliation, didn't know about the wedding seating debacle or the constant presence of the ex at every gathering. They just knew what my mother-in-law told them, and she told them we were the villains in this story. My father-in-law called 4 days later. His voice was different this time. Flat exhausted, defeated. He sounded like he'd aged 20 years in a week. I need to come over and talk to you both in person. This can't be a phone conversation. Can I come over now? We said yes, and he showed up 30 minutes later. When he arrived, he looked terrible. Bags under his eyes, unshaven, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. He looked like he'd been through hell. He sat down at our kitchen table and asked for a glass of water. His hands were shaking as he drank it. Then he told us he'd been doing some investigating of his own. He said something had felt wrong from the beginning, from that very first phone call about the ex being pregnant. His wife had been too nervous, too insistent, too eager to believe the worst about their son. It didn't sit right with him. He knew his wife could be difficult and controlling, but this seemed extreme even for her. He'd started going through their finances, bank statements from accounts his wife didn't know he had access to. Joint accounts that sent him monthly statements via email statements she thought he never looked at. And he found withdrawals, hundreds of them over the past 3 years. Small amounts, mostly $20 or $30 here and there, never enough to be immediately noticeable, but sometimes larger amounts, $100 or $200. They added up thousands upon thousands of dollars, all withdrawn in cash over the course of 3 years, all impossible to trace to specific purchases. When he confronted his wife about the money, showing her printed statements with the withdrawals highlighted, she tried to lie at first, said it was for groceries and personal expenses. But he'd done the math. The amount was far beyond what anyone would need for reasonable personal expenses, especially when their regular bills and groceries were paid from the same account via debit card. He pressed her, told her he wasn't stupid, told her he knew something was going on, and she needed to come clean. She'd broken down completely. Not the fake crying she did for manipulation, but real crying, the kind where you can't breathe properly and your whole body shakes. She confessed everything. Confessed through sobs that yes, the withdrawals had been going to the ex. Monthly payments, sometimes weekly funding, her rent, her car payments, her utilities, her life. My mother-in-law had been secretly supporting her for years, paying her bills, buying her groceries, keeping her financially dependent, and emotionally close, keeping her available. When she found out I was pregnant, announced at that disastrous dinner where she'd been given her ultimatum, she'd panicked. This meant her son's marriage was real, permanent, producing offspring. The ex was being pushed out of the picture, and her fantasy of getting them back together was dying. So she'd called the ex that same night and suggested something drastic. My father-in-law's voice shook as he explained what he'd discovered. After confronting his wife about the withdrawals, she'd broken down and confessed everything. The payments to the ex, the constant updates about our lives, and worst of all, the fake pregnancy scheme. He'd demanded to see proof, and in her panicked state, she'd unlocked her phone to show him one message, thinking it would help her case. Instead, he'd taken the phone and found hundreds more. My father-in-law pulled out his phone and showed us screenshots of text messages between his wife and the ex. Messages going back months, discussing the plan in detail, discussing timing, discussing how to make it believable, discussing what to say and when to say it. My mother-in-law had even offered to pay for fake ultrasound images if needed. She told the ex that once my husband left me, they could all be a family again the way it was supposed to be. I felt sick, actually, physically sick. My husband got up and walked out of the room. I heard him in the bathroom, and I'm pretty sure he was vomiting. My father-in-law sat there with tears in his eyes, apologizing over and over. He said he'd never imagined his wife was capable of something like this, that he thought she was just overly attached, maybe a bit delusional, but not malicious, not cruel. This was cruel. This was calculated and deliberate and designed to destroy our marriage and hurt their own grandchild in the process. The ex sent an email the next morning. A long, rambling confession about how she wasn't pregnant, had never been pregnant, had agreed to the plan because she was desperate to get my husband back, and my mother-in-law had convinced her it would work. She said she was sorry that she knew it was wrong, but she'd been so lonely, and my mother-in-law had been so persuasive. She made herself sound like a victim, like she'd been manipulated too. Maybe she had been, but she'd also been a willing participant in a scheme to destroy my family. My husband forwarded the email to every single family member, every aunt, uncle, cousin, grandparent. He added a message explaining the entire situation, the timeline we'd constructed, the bank statements his father had found, the text messages between his mother and the ex. He laid it all out in excruciating detail. Then he blocked anyone who tried to defend his mother or minimize what she'd done. His aunt, who'd called him shameful, blocked. His uncle who'd lectured about family loyalty blocked. His cousins who'd unfriended me blocked. Within hours, people started calling, some to apologize, some to express shock and disbelief, some to say they'd always thought his mother was a bit odd, but had never imagined this level of dysfunction. A few family members doubled down, insisting we must have done something to push his mother to such extremes. That family should forgive family. Those people got blocked too. My husband was done, completely done. And honestly, so was I. My father-in-law told us he was leaving his wife. He said he couldn't stay married to someone who would do this to their own child, who would try to destroy their son's marriage and lie about their future grandchild. He said he'd been making excuses for her behavior for decades. But this was beyond excuse. This was beyond forgiveness. He packed his things and moved into a hotel that same week, and within the month he'd filed for divorce. My mother-in-law hired a lawyer and threatened to sue us for defamation. She claimed we damaged her reputation by sharing private information without her consent. Our lawyer sent her a letter explaining that truth is an absolute defense against defamation. And if she wanted to pursue legal action, we had hundreds of pages of evidence we'd be happy to present in court. We also had grounds for a countersuit for emotional distress harassment and attempted fraud. She dropped the threat immediately. The ex moved out of state within 2 weeks, just packed up and left. Couldn't handle the fallout and the public shame. Apparently, several people had contacted her directly after my husband forwarded that confession email. Some expressing disappointment, some expressing anger, some just wanting to know why she'd done it. She changed her phone number, deleted her social media accounts, and disappeared. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, started over with a new job and new friends who didn't know anything about this disaster. Good riddance to her and her desperate attempt to recapture a relationship that had ended over 5 years ago. At my 16-week checkup, my doctor noticed my blood pressure was dangerously high, 160/95, which is well into the hypertensive range, especially dangerous for pregnancy. She asked about stress levels and I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the examination room, this slightly hysterical sound that made the nurse look concerned. Stress levels. Where do I even begin? Should I start with the mother-in-law who chose my husband's ex over her own grandchild? Or jump straight to the conspiracy to fake a pregnancy and destroy my marriage? Or maybe discuss the family members who believed I was some kind of manipulative villain who'd poisoned my husband against his poor innocent mother? My doctor looked at my chart, looked at me with genuine concern in her eyes, and told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to be on bed rest immediately. Complete bed rest, no work, no stress, nothing that could spike my blood pressure further. She said if my blood pressure stayed this high, I was at serious risk for preeclampsia, which could be life-threatening for both me and the baby. She wanted me horizontal as much as possible, only getting up for bathroom breaks and gentle walks around the house once a day. No cooking, no cleaning, no answering stressful phone calls. My only job was to stay calm and let this baby grow. My husband took a full week off work to take care of me, used all his vacation days without hesitation. He cooked every meal, handled all the cleaning, did laundry, managed the ongoing family drama, screened phone calls, responded to emails. He set up the bedroom like a recovery suite, brought in a mini fridge so I could have snacks and water within reach, set up my laptop on a bed so I could watch shows, brought me books from the library about pregnancy and parenting. He brought me 3 meals a day on a tray, helped me to the bathroom when I needed it, read to me when I was bored with television. It was the most present he'd been in our entire marriage, and it only took a complete emotional apocalypse and a medical emergency to get us there. I didn't know whether to be grateful that he was finally stepping up or furious that it had taken this long, that it had taken my health being at risk. I settled on both. I could hold 2 emotions at once. I could appreciate what he was doing now while also remembering the 3 years he'd stood by and watched his mother tear me down. Both things could be true simultaneously. We started therapy during my bed rest individual sessions and couples sessions, all done via video call from the bedroom since I couldn't leave the house. My therapist specialized in family trauma and narcissistic personality disorders, and she listened to my story with increasingly wide eyes. She made notes, lots of notes, and at one point actually said, "This is one of the more extreme cases of mother-son impingement I've encountered." She told me what I already knew deep down, that my mother-in-law's behavior was abusive, that it had been abusive for years, and that my husband had been conditioned since childhood to accept and enable it. She explained concepts like emotional incest, where a parent treats a child as an emotional spouse, making the child responsible for the parent's happiness and emotional regulation. She explained triangulation, where my mother-in-law had inserted the ex into our relationship to create conflict and maintain control. She explained love bombing and intermittent reinforcement patterns my mother-in-law had used to keep both my husband and the ex dependent on her approval. She said the fact that my husband had finally stood up to her was a huge step, possibly the biggest step he'd ever taken in his life, but that we had years of patterns to unlearn and repair. My husband's therapist, a man who'd specialized in helping people recover from manipulative family systems, said similar things. He talked about enchantment, about toxic family dynamics, about learned helplessness, and the fog of fear, obligation, and guilt that keeps people trapped in unhealthy relationships. He helped my husband understand that his mother's love had always come with conditions, that she'd raised him to prioritize her feelings over his own, over anyone's, that his sense of normal had been calibrated wrong from childhood, that what he'd been taught was love was actually control dressed up in maternal instinct. He started to see how deep the damage went, how many of his behaviors and reactions were rooted in a childhood spent managing his mother's emotions instead of developing his own. He'd been trained to read her moods, anticipate her needs, prevent her distress at all costs. He'd learned that his own feelings didn't matter, that setting boundaries was selfish, that saying no was a betrayal. His therapist said, "This conditioning runs so deep that it feels like truth, feels like love, feels like what family is supposed to be. Breaking free from it requires essentially rewiring your entire understanding of relationships." In couples therapy, we talked about trust, about how I'd been asking him for 3 years to set boundaries, and he'd only done it when I threatened to leave, about how that had damaged my faith in him, in us, in our future together, about how I'd been fighting this battle alone while he sat on the sidelines making excuses. He cried actual tears, which I'd rarely seen from him. He apologized, said he understood why I'd felt abandoned, why I'd felt betrayed by his inaction. His therapist had him write a letter to his mother, not to send, just to process his feelings. He wrote 23 pages. 23 pages of anger and hurt and confusion and grief. He read parts of it to me, and I cried listening to him finally articulate what he'd been feeling all these years. The guilt, the obligation, the fear of disappointing her, the desperate need for her approval. It was heartbreaking. Then he wrote a second letter. This one was to send. It was 2 pages long and laid out clear boundaries. No contact for at least 6 months. Mandatory therapy for her during that time with proof of attendance. A genuine apology. Not to him, but to me, acknowledging what she'd done and the harm she'd caused. And even then, he said he wasn't promising forgiveness or reconciliation. He was only promising to consider the possibility. Her response came 3 days later. 7 pages of justification and blame. She admitted to nothing. She said she'd only been trying to protect her son from making a mistake, that she'd always known I wasn't right for him, that the ex was the better choice. She said I'd manipulated him, turned him against her, poisoned him with my bitterness. She said she'd done nothing wrong, and she certainly wasn't going to apologize for loving her son too much. We updated every legal document. We had medical power of attorney, emergency contacts, life insurance, beneficiaries, will, and testament. We removed my mother-in-law from everything and replaced her with my father-in-law and my sister. We consulted with a lawyer about grandparent rights in our state and documented everything. Every text message, every voicemail, every piece of evidence we might need if she tried to sue for visitation later. She showed up at our house twice. The first time my husband answered the door and told her to leave. She refused, said she had a right to see her son, to talk to him. He told her if she didn't leave immediately, he'd call the police. She started crying, making a scene on our front porch. The neighbors came out to watch. My husband called the police anyway. They asked her to leave, and she did, but not before shouting at him that he'd regret this, that family was forever, that I'd destroyed everything. The second time we weren't home. She tried to get in through the back door, actually attempted to break the lock. Our security camera caught everything. We took the footage to the police and filed for a restraining order. The judge granted it immediately after seeing the footage and reading our documentation of harassment. My mother-in-law was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from our property and have no contact with either of us. My blood pressure slowly returned to normal. The bed rest helped, as did the therapy, as did finally having some peace and distance from the chaos. By my 20th week, my doctor cleared me to resume normal activities, though she warned me to avoid stress as much as possible. I almost laughed. Avoid stress. Sure, I'll just avoid my entire life for the next 20 weeks. We decided to do a small gender reveal party. Just the people who'd supported us through everything. My father-in-law, my sister, my best friend from college, my husband's best friend who'd been horrified by the whole situation. 11 people total. We ordered a cake, the kind where the inside reveals the gender when you cut it. My husband and I cut it together, and the inside was pink, a girl. We were having a daughter. Everyone cheered and congratulated us. But I felt this strange mix of joy and terror. Joy because I'd wanted a daughter. Terror because now I had to figure out how to raise her in the aftermath of all this. How to protect her from the kind of toxic love that had damaged her father. My husband squeezed my hand and whispered that we'd figure it out together, that we'd do better than his parents did. I hoped he was right. My father-in-law started coming around more often, not to mediate or push reconciliation, just to be there to be a grandfather. He brought baby gifts, helped set up the nursery, asked questions about our birth plan. He was genuinely trying to build a relationship with us separate from his wife. It was strange at first seeing him without her, but it was also nice. He was different when she wasn't around. Calmer, funnier, more present. The divorce proceedings were apparently brutal. My mother-in-law fought for everything, tried to claim she deserved half of assets she hadn't contributed to, hired an expensive lawyer to drag things out. My father-in-law's lawyer presented the bank statements showing the secret withdrawals to the ex as evidence of financial misconduct. The judge was not impressed with my mother-in-law's explanations. She ended up with far less than she'd hoped for in the settlement. Word reached us through family members that she was court-ordered to attend therapy as part of the divorce proceedings. Apparently, my father-in-law had documented years of emotional manipulation and control, and the judge had concerns about her mental health. She was going, supposedly, but according to the family grapevine, she spent most sessions talking about how everyone had betrayed her. Her therapist was reportedly earning every penny. I went into labor at 38 weeks, right on schedule. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the contractions hit like a freight train. My husband panicked, couldn't find the hospital bag we'd packed weeks ago, ran around the house grabbing random items. I had to tell him 3 times that yes, the bag was in the closet where I told him it was. Men, even in crisis, they can't find things right in front of them. Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 long, painful hours of contractions and breathing exercises, and my husband trying to be supportive while also looking like he might pass out. The nurses kept offering him a chair, asking if he needed water. I told them to focus on me. I was the one actually pushing a human out of my body. He held my hand through all of it, though never left my side. Whispered encouragement even when I told him to shut up. Our daughter was born at 4:17 in the afternoon, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. She had her father's nose and my eyes, a shocking amount of dark hair, and the loudest cry I'd ever heard. The nurses cleaned her up and placed her on my chest. And I looked at this tiny person and felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of keeping her safe, keeping her healthy, keeping her away from the kind of toxicity that had defined our family for too long. My husband cried when he held her. Real tears, not the polite moisture he'd shown in therapy. He kept saying, she was perfect. She was so perfect. He couldn't believe she was ours. I watched him with our daughter and saw something shift in his face. This was real now. We weren't just fighting for our marriage anymore. We were fighting for her childhood, for her right to grow up without manipulation and conditional love. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and diaper changes and figuring out how to be parents. My father-in-law visited often, always calling first, always respecting our space and boundaries. He was a surprisingly good grandfather, patient and gentle with our daughter. He told us once that he wished he'd been more present when my husband was young, that maybe things would have been different if he'd stood up to his wife sooner. Better late than never, I suppose. We heard through the grapevine that my mother-in-law was still in therapy, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. A few family members who'd initially supported her eventually came around after seeing the evidence we'd shared, after hearing multiple sides of the story. Some sent apology messages. We accepted a few, mostly from people who'd been genuinely misled rather than actively malicious. Others remained blocked. Forgiveness has limits. My sister-in-law, who'd always been on our side, told us that their mother had tried to show up at her house once, demanding information about the baby. My sister-in-law had threatened to call the police and reminded her about the restraining order that, while specific to our house, demonstrated a pattern of harassment. My mother-in-law left, but apparently sent a series of text messages calling her own daughter a traitor. My sister-in-law blocked her after that. Our daughter is 6 months old now. She's healthy, happy, hitting all her milestones. She smiles when she sees her grandfather, reaches for her father when he comes home from work, falls asleep on my chest during late-night feedings. Our marriage is stronger than it was before, though. That's a low bar considering how close we came to divorce. We still go to therapy, still work on communication, still navigate the aftermath of those 3 years of toxicity. My mother-in-law remains court-ordered in therapy, though reports suggest she's made minimal progress. She's not allowed contact with us, and we have no intention of lifting that restriction anytime soon. Some relatives have quietly resumed contact with her, and we've accepted that we can't control what other people do. We can only control our own boundaries and our own family. Several family members remain permanently blocked. Their choice to defend her manipulation more important to them than having a relationship with us. My husband is different now, more assertive, more present, more willing to prioritize our little family over his extended one. He's in year 2 of therapy and finally starting to unpack decades of conditioning and guilt. He's learning that setting boundaries doesn't make him a bad son, that protecting his wife and daughter doesn't make him disloyal. It's hard work and some days are better than others, but he's trying. That's more than he did for the first 3 years of our marriage. I look at our daughter sometimes and think about the grandmother she'll never know. Part of me feels sad about that, about the relationship that could have existed if my mother-in-law had been capable of healthy love. But mostly I feel relieved. Relieved that our daughter won't grow up being compared to some idealized version of someone else. Relieved that she won't learn to accept manipulation as love. Relieved that we broke the cycle before it could touch her. The peace we have now is worth everything we lost. The family members who chose sides against us the holidays spent with just the 2 of us. The complicated explanations we'll eventually have to give our daughter about why she doesn't have a grandmother on her father's side. All of it is worth the peace, worth the knowledge that we're building something healthier, something better, something that doesn't require us to set ourselves on fire to keep other people warm. Some family is worth fighting for. Some family is worth fighting against. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is recognize the difference and act accordingly. We chose our daughter. We chose each other. We chose peace over approval, and I don't regret it for a single second. This is where we are now. A small family of 3 plus 1 grandfather who's trying to make amends, living quietly in a house with a restraining order filed against someone who should have loved us unconditionally but loved control more. It's not the fairy tale ending anyone hopes for, but it's real and it's ours. And we're building something genuine from the ashes of something toxic. Some days I'm angry about the 3 years we wasted trying to make it work. Other days I'm grateful we figured it out before our daughter was old enough to remember the chaos. My husband says he can't imagine going back to who he was before. Can't imagine allowing his mother's manipulation to continue. Can't imagine choosing her feelings over our family's well-being. That's growth. That's therapy working. That's what happens when someone finally decides to break free from a lifetime of conditioning. It's messy and painful and requires constant vigilance, but it's worth it. We're worth it. Our daughter is worth it. And that's my story. A mother-in-law who loved an ex-girlfriend more than her own future grandchild. A conspiracy to fake a pregnancy and destroy a marriage. A family fractured by lies and manipulation. And through it all, 2 people who decided to choose each other and their child over the dysfunction that tried to consume them. It's not pretty, and it's not over. But we're still here, still standing, still building something better.